Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the February 2022 meeting of the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, or the MHRA, as we prefer to call it. My name is Stephen Lightfoot, and I'm the chair of the board, and my role is to lead us through today's agenda. So for those of you who've not attended one of our board meetings before, I must start by saying that this is a board meeting held in public, and it is not a public meeting. Having said that, when we've finished our board business, we will provide an opportunity for members of the public to ask questions at the end of our meeting. Now, due to a technical difficulty, we're not able to live stream the meeting today, but we are recording the meeting so that members of the public can actually see what we discussed and actually the answers to the questions that they've raised in advance. I think it's also important to say that our board is responsible for the strategic leadership of the agency, and it does not make regulatory decisions on individual products, as that's done very ably by the officials and expert committees within the agency. I'm also pleased that we did have 60 people registered to vote for observe the meeting live, but obviously that unfortunately won't happen now. But we will, as I said, make it very clear that there's an opportunity to present this on the website so that people can still see the meeting in hand. I think that with introductions in mind, I'd just like to go around the table and ask everyone to introduce themselves, please, just so the audience who do observe this meeting after the event know who we all are. So, June, start with you.
Good morning, I'm June Rain. I'm the Chief Executive at the MHRA.
Good morning, I'm Raj Long, Non-Executive Director at the MHRA.
Good morning, Glenn Wells, Chief Partnerships Officer at the MHRA.
Graham Cook, Non-Executive Director.
Good morning, I'm Laura Squire. I'm Chief Healthcare Quality and Access Officer at the MHRA.
Good morning, my name is Michael Whitehouse. I'm a non-executive and I'm Chair of the Audit and Risk Assurance Committee.
Good morning, I'm Claire Harrison, Chief Technology Officer at the MHRA.
Good morning, I'm Mercy Jesse, I'm Non-Executive Director and Chair of the Patient Safety and Engagement Committee.
Good morning, Catherine Glover, Deputy Director, Medicines Regulation and Prescribing at the Department of Health and Social Care.
Good morning, John Fundry, Chief Operating Officer at MHRA.
Mandy Calvert, Non-Exec Director and Chair of the Organisation Development and Remuneration Committee.
Good morning, Alison Cave, Chief Safety Officer at the MHRA.
Good morning, Paul Goldsmith, Non-Executive Director.
Good morning, Mark Bailey, Chief Science and Innovation Officer.
Morning, Haider Hussain, Associate Non-Executive Director at the MHRA.
Good morning, Colin McGarry, Director of Governance at MHRA.
Excellent, thank you, colleagues. So I think what we'd like to do today is work our way through the board pack. And what I'll do is to use the page numbers in the board pack to keep us all on track. I'll also assume that everyone has read the papers so that we can then spend most of our time on discussion on the individual items. So I think that's all I want to say by way of introduction. So I suggest that we go straight into the main part of the agenda. The purpose of the meeting we've already described, a number of key items we want to discuss today. We described who the board directors are. We've got apologies for absence from Junaid Bajwa, and also we had apologies from Alison Strath and Greg Chalmers from the Scottish Government. I think in terms of declarations of interest, that's on page 2 of the pack. Paul, I think there's an additional declaration from yourself.
So the company which I'm an employee of, Closed Loop Medicine, has put in an ILAP and an IDAP application and initiated a CPRD feasibility study.
Okay, thank you for that. And Haider, I think you've got an additional declaration to make as well.
Yes, I am a panel chair for the BSI, but we don't have any, in my role, I don't have any responsibility with healthcare regulation, which I think is mentioned in the paper.
Yeah, I think that's helpful. I think it's very clear that the health and safety paper mentions the British Standards Institution, and that doesn't actually conflict in any way with Haider's advisory role in terms of the artificial intelligence panel that he chairs. So I think just from a transparency point of view, we wanted to make that one quite clear. Okay, were there any other new declarations of interest that have not already been included in the pack? No? Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. Okay, if we move on to page 5, we've got the minutes of the last meeting. Can I just first of all check, are they an accurate record of the last meeting? Not seeing anyone making any comments. So, okay. So on that basis, let's please approve those minutes as approved, as an accurate record. In terms of the actions, if we move to page 12 on the pack, you can see the list of actions there. And if we just focus just very quickly on the red ones, which are the ones that were due this month, there's item number 66. I think that's fair to say that's actually on the agenda. I think we've got a report from Mandy's committee on 66. Also on number 67, there's updating the red, amber, green rating. That's been done, and that's also in the paper we'll come on to on the agenda as well for John. Thank you. And then action 72, June. We wanted to send written responses to those observers whose questions weren't answered last month.
Happy to say all sent.
Great. So we can say that one is, action 72 is therefore completed. So excellent. Thank you for that. Can I just check if there are any other issues arising from any of the actions or anything to do with the last meeting?
Action 38, we've already had that meeting, so it's a PSEC meeting, and Michael will be commenting on that today. So
Done it early, so thank you, that's great. So thank you for that, Mercy. So we'll be able to, after today's meeting, also say that action 38 is completed. Thank you, Mercy, that's great. Okay, so that being the case then, let's move straight on into the next item, which is agency performance, and what are the most important activities and priorities from the CEO's point of view. So it's page 16. June, over to you.
Well, thank you, Stephen. This report brings together our current activities and priorities for our discussion today, and I think clearly shows the breadth of the issues that we deal with in terms of science, regulation and public health. But what I'd really like to focus on at the outset to highlight is our dynamic organisation, because this month's report comes at a time of really intense activity to complete the transformation to our one agency organisation. Since we launched the new structure on the 10th of January, we've been building new teams, and it's a whole agency transformation based, of course, on the product life cycle, with new teams right across the agency: science, research and innovation, healthcare access and safety and surveillance. And of course, to maximise the success of the life cycle model, there are new teams in partnerships, in enablement and in corporate functions. And we're really looking forward now to realising the benefits of transformation by re-engineering our priority services, refreshing our technology roadmap and supporting our financial sustainability by reviewing our fees. So I hope that gives the board the sense of all the action that's happening in that area. Of course, in terms of healthcare access, we're continually driving forward, particularly the range of products for COVID-19. A fifth vaccine came through the regulatory process. This is the Novavax version, a protein-based vaccine, much more like the traditional vaccine formats. And it's really, I think, important to record that NIBS has certificated over 210 million doses for UK and overseas use of all the COVID vaccines, and that's a tremendous record. Just would like to highlight the expanding work on our innovative and licensing and access pathway. The summit meeting with our partners has really, in a way, re-energised things. There's new information on the genomic medicines out there on the web, and we're also pleased to have launched a new digital portal for those applications of target development profiles so that they can flow in through the system. And we're continuing to encourage the use of real-world data to take time out of the development profile. Proposals for new clinical trials legislations are now out. I was hearing just this morning 500 responses so far, so it's clearly drawn huge interest. And our consultation on medical device legislation will be touching on later, but those responses, all 900 of them, are being analysed. And I'd like to highlight some of the work we do to widen access. People may well have seen the HRT product out to consultation for pharmacy availability, as its safety record is so good, better access for women in the menopause. Finally, not to just leave it, is to stress safety is always our priority. The signals for vaccines are continually under review, as are the safety of the antivirals, where we've got an information gap to fill on pregnancy. There's a new registry that we'll be promoting so that health professionals can report any pregnancies that occur on one of the new antivirals. The safety of isotretinoin has concerned us for quite some time, ensuring that the patient voice is heard, and it's good news that this is progressing now as the advice of the CHM is taken forward. And perhaps an area that we haven't focused on much is to benefit from transformation, a new criminal enforcement unit, and that's taking a much more proactive, preventative approach to keeping medicines safe. So really, in a nutshell, focus on transformation, but continuing to stepwise address patient involvement in a more coordinated way. Financial sustainability will be in our minds as we move forward, leaving the trading fund status around the beginning of April. But as ever, we're pressing ahead to develop the innovation pathway, particularly for devices as well as medicines, and to do all this well, building our partnerships. So I'll leave it there, Chair, because I think there's such a lot we can delve into. Thank you.
Well, thank you, June. As always, I continue to be impressed by the extensive range of activities that the agency is very much involved in. So thank you to all the staff that have been involved in delivering that. Also, I think it's been quite helpful on the last page to identify what you see as the priorities really effectively for the coming month in particular. So I think that gives us quite a nice framework. Can I just ask if there are any specific questions that anyone wants to raise? Mercy.
Yes, on 4.2, obviously patient involvement strategy. I welcome that. That's brilliant in terms of accountability. I know that kind of 1 and 5, which is improving our understanding of patient perception of risk and benefit of medicines and devices, and improving patient representation on committees and groups, is coming to the Patient Safety and Engagement Committee. Just a general question really about how it's going to operate. So the Chief Officer who's responsible for these different areas, they're looking across the agency in different areas. That's my understanding of it. Is that right?
Yes, it's good to highlight that Chief Officers will own one of the priorities, but look across the agency in delivering it. And as you've highlighted, some of the priorities are fixable. Improving the diversity in our patient group consultative forum is something that we've thought about for a long time, but that is eminently achievable. The one that you've focused on too, understanding benefit risk, we see as a slightly longer term, and the chief who owns that one will have a bit of work to do to get the latest understanding and how we can fully capitalise on some research in this area. So the priorities are quite a mixed bag, but you're absolutely right. The chief that owns each one will take a holistic view, and we're trying to prioritise quick deliverables and then think to building longer term. Until we fully understand the nature of the appreciation of benefit risk, we won't truly be able to communicate risk and benefit well in ways that patients and the public find usable for the decisions they make.
That's really good. And what I also like is the fact that it's cross-agency.
Yeah.
And then obviously different programmes will deliver at different times, but that's fine.
Yeah, it's another good example of one agency working, isn't it? I think that's very, very helpful. Michael?
Chair, just 2 questions from me. Again, a very impressive report. June, in relation to COVID, it would be useful just to know a little bit more about what we're doing to support the developing world, because COVID is a global problem. I'm interested a little bit in the work that we're doing with other regulators, particularly in the developing countries. And
should we just pause there, Michael?
Yes.
We'll come back to your second point.
It's a matter that we and our staff find very important indeed. When we say 210 million doses of vaccines approved, we're more than conscious of where they will go. Of the AZ vaccine, 2.5 billion doses given all over the world. Obviously not all certificated by us, but it's a very powerful representation of what the agency is contributing and will continue to do as we work more closely with the WHO. And at the other end of the life cycle, in terms of signal detection, we're closely working with 4 African countries, and it may soon be 5. This is Nigeria, Ethiopia, Ghana, South Africa, and soon to be Kenya, to enable local decision making. And that's what we feel is the most important donation we can give, that in terms of safe use, those countries will be able to communicate and support the safe use of the vaccines. So it's an end-to-end process. The bit that we're not yet where we want to be in the middle is our growing relationship with the World Health Organization. And Chair, I think we'll come back to talk about that more as it crystallises. There is a willingness and there is some funding to be able to truly maximise our assessment capability so that it takes the heavy lifting out of a new vaccine coming into play in a particular low and middle income country. So a number of uses, but all down to Tedros's no one's safe till everyone's safe.
Yes. Thank you. I welcome that assurance.
Okay, second point.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm really impressed by the work that you're doing on criminal enforcement, but obviously crimes related to medicine and drugs is a global phenomenon, and I'm just interested in the quality of information, the comprehensiveness of the information that we are getting now as a standalone regulator. You're confident that you're getting the information and the signals that you need that criminal enforcement activity will have real bite?
Chair, it's something that no one is ever complacent about here. Some time ago, we took a definitive step and, in a way, donated to the WHO our key enforcement lead who developed Operational Pangaea, which has actually been such a success. But a once-a-year effort round the world isn't a cure, and therefore our new criminal enforcement unit will be looking into the area of intelligence as we re-stabilise and scale up our activities. Our main plank is our relationship with WHO and their outreach, which remains very strong. But I do think it's another area when we try to move to prevention rather than cure, we should step up. It's truly wicked crime, and we know that some borders, particularly in low and middle income countries, are what we call porous. If half of all malaria prevention and treatment products are fake, then we have a huge problem, and it may land here, just as a Lassa fever case landed here the other week. So let's step up as we reinvigorate our criminal enforcement unit in the international space.
Okay. Thank you.
It's another good example of collaboration, I think, isn't it, in this particular space? So, Raj, were you going to follow on point?
Yeah, just a follow-up point, I think. It's really great to hear the work MHRA is doing in terms of the development countries that Michael raised. There is a flip side to it that the agency will also can benefit from. One, as you correctly said, like the AZ vaccine that went up to $2.5 billion. I think what the agency will have as an unintended outcome is you have a larger cohort to correlate your own data with the data that's going to come in from these countries because the vaccines are safe. But very importantly, you're also going to have cohorts in the context of ethnic diversity. That can also help you very much in the signal detection that Alison's team would be doing to make sure that it'll confirm or it can raise questions. So I think there's an unintended outcome here that the agency can actually benefit from as well.
We always see it as a two-way track, in fact. And the population here and the uptake, it's been impressive, but it is only what we can delve into, yellow card and so forth. So these international links are vital, in particular in the early phase. So I do hope that some of the pilot work we've done through the Gates Foundation will then become a more systematic approach to international early detection of signals as we think ahead to the future pandemics, as we might want to, with not just vaccines but therapeutics and diagnostics, to have that infrastructure of rapid access to data as it emerges is going to be vital.
I think it just demonstrates the central role that partnerships are going to play through all of this. It's not just with the World Health Organization, it's with other international regulators too. So I think we'll come back to that in due course in the board schedule of business, actually, but that's great. Paul, I think you had a question.
Yeah, I mean, it's a couple of reflections and questions, if I may. I mean, in a fantastic report, very comprehensive. And the first one was the Levelling Up white paper came out 2 weeks ago, and there was a bit on arm's length bodies, page 130. The majority of arm's length bodies are being targeted for relocation to outside London. So it's just something to be aware of. And then two things which I think are fantastic. The first is on CPRD, that we're now recruiting patients into trials, and I see this as such a great opportunity to build on, and also the Access Consortium. And related to both, and interested to know what our strategy is, or who is responsible to expand access to other countries, who takes the lead on that, and then on the possibilities that CPRD will bring. How do we communicate? What is our marketing strategy to inform the world, particularly the US, that UK is open for business? Now, to really transform, particularly CPRD, we need the money, and that's sort of a key issue for us in crossing that chasm. And you mentioned 6.1, the fees, and I was sort of interested reading the Managing Public Money document from Treasury that allows recouping of historic fees, including R&D, that can be incorporated. And also sort of thinking that a notified body cost for a medical device can be £50,000 to £100,000. FDA registration fee is, the minimal one is $5,672. So we've talked about it in previous board meetings. It's sort of looking at the broader context and really pushing this.
There's maybe a number of points there, aren't there? Maybe I'll come to maybe John on fees in a moment. But June, first of all, do you want to talk about accommodation first?
Yes,
we'll talk about CPRD
in the Levelling Up white paper, we've obviously been thinking about, not just in terms of its direction, reinforcing that arm's length bodies will be outside London from 2030. That's a context we've been working in, but need to do more, particularly as we re-establish normality. So that's very much in mind, and I think will be a good topic for board discussion, if you agree, in due course. Maybe we take the Access Consortium point next. That's clear. You've said, how do we look to expansion? The Canadian lead has recently changed, so there'll be a bit of stability between Australia, Canada, Singapore, Switzerland and ourselves, but very much looking to a bit of an expansionist approach. Our strategy that's been published does have some important elements that maybe the originators can fix, including our link with HTA and some areas of really quite new exploration. But once we have the stability of the five, to look into a broader base would be really, really exciting. And then your point about CPRD, yes, we're really excited at the sprint. The speedy recruitment trials is taking off. That's a new service, and its uptake is something that really will help everyone, and we're trying to market it in the context of the clinical trials public consultation. But I think your point is well made. How well is CPRD's unique power to support not just clinical trial recruitment, but also clearly its traditional use in hypothesis testing. So let's think again about marketing. It could well be that our new one organisation gives us yet more opportunities. Certainly ILAP does, and suitably marketed IDAP in due course, the devices access pathway. So every opportunity to use that data maximally for public health.
Okay. And Alison, as the Chief Officer responsible for CPRD, is there anything else you want to add to some thinking on that?
So certainly we're looking hard at how we can best maximise CPRD's sort of potential, if you like. Obviously we're looking hard at the analytical platforms, and that's really our first priority in the next sort of few months to get that underway. I suppose second priority is how big and how wide do we want the expansion for CPRD? What's the sweet spot in terms of coverage of the UK? And what I would like to explore more is how we can maximise the data linkages, because we know that secondary care still is an area where we want to maximise our data linkages and improve our data capabilities. So there's sort of two angles really: expanding the primary care reach, but then improving data linkages for secondary and indeed tertiary care as well.
Yeah, and maybe John, come to you just in terms of fees. It might have been a question in the delivery plan paper anyway, but just want to sort of say a few words just briefly around what we're doing around fees.
Sure, Chair. So first of all, congratulations to Paul for managing to read Managing Public Money. It is quite a dry document. Suffice to say that the main underpinning steer of it is fees should be based on cost, so it's cost plus recovery is the regime. In terms of CPRD, when they were developing the pricing for the clinical trials offering, we did make sure that we'd priced in the necessary systems development work. I think that's something we're very conscious of in the forthcoming revamp.
Yeah.
We haven't in the past necessarily priced in the necessary systems, and that's something we definitely want to do in future. In terms of CPRD's development, clearly they want to reinforce their cloud-based offering and develop the trusted research environment. Both of those will require investment, and therefore we need to recover it. Finally, in just in terms of the overall fees project, we have some market research underway at the moment, which will look at where we stand versus, if you like, our competition around the world. And that's both for our kind of regulated products, if you like, and also those products and services that aren't statutory, that perhaps we can adopt a slightly different commercial basis on that. So that work's underway at the moment.
So very much work in progress, I think, John. So thank you for that. Mandy.
I think building on a couple of points actually Paul made, the clinical trials work, I think really important. Recruitment of patients is probably the biggest blocker in many cases to getting trials up and running, particularly commercially. So I think really understanding the offer there and the value that gives to particularly commercial companies. I think we often undervalue the importance of that and how much time it takes. So maybe as we work through that consultation, to understand also what our piece is in the whole value chain, if you like, of clinical trials, because there are other things that are blocking, and what can we then influence to make that process much more streamlined to enable the UK to be a good place. So I think we're not going to be able to do everything, but understand where we sit and where we can enable. So maybe a broader discussion at a later meeting.
Yeah, I think we'll definitely be coming back to clinical trials, June. I think it's fair to say.
Absolutely, and fortunately we're well embedded in the wider picture, the recovery, resilience and growth strategy, and we have key deliverables in that. But I do think this present consultation is actually engaging with patients in a way that we haven't really until COVID, and we saw what willingness there was to participate, to build on that. It's an interesting point that has come out that patients who participate often are never informed of the outcome. Yeah. So there are ways of really reinforcing the value of being in a trial. And we really want to ride on this, I think, almost altruistic response that we've seen in COVID to make being in a trial a great place to be, and that feeling of contribution that people obviously sense. But it is top priority in terms of looking at our services where we can enable and work with others.
Yeah, and the other point was really again on the Access Consortium, is to understand how that is actually helping us get medicines more quickly to patients in terms of, I know we're doing some work on working groups, but really again understanding how that's having an impact on public health and patient health. So I think always make sure we remember that bit rather than the working groups, which are enablers.
Lead, I think, enables us to start asking, as the new member of the family, we kind of join to be part of the team. But I think with another new member, we can start opening up some questions and some metrics on the benefits of work sharing. It's not just can we divide and deliver a very efficient service, but let's look at those metrics on time saved and population access that I'm sure we're ready to do now.
And I'm just thinking, Mark, just thinking about the ILAP summit. I think you were involved in that. Was there any linkages to what we've just been talking about that also came into the ILAP summit and feedback from other stakeholders?
Oh yes, absolutely. I mean, one of the most exciting aspects of the ILAP summit was really getting involvement from the patients and from the other stakeholders, industry, about what it's doing and the mechanisms. There was a lot of questions, a lot of push on how we can improve, expand ILAP. So it did set out some major questions on what should we prioritise next in terms of the ILAP expansion. So yes, I would say definitely the patient recruitment was highlighted. We had various patient groups there talking about. We're still working through that huge body of information, and we will be coming back to the board with an update on how we're using the summit.
Because it strikes me as linking a number of things together.
Yes.
Because we can have the innovation passport. Think about how the product profile. Think about then the clinical trials that need to support the evidence, both from a regulatory and a health technology assessment point of view, and then moving through a regulatory process as quickly as we can. So that strikes me as a sweet spot where we need to bring a number of components together on innovative medicines, and we need different processes for others.
I fully agree, and with the transformation we have the product lifecycle structure, so we've brought the clinical trials team and the ILAP teams much closer together to achieve just what you've described.
And I think that's helpful. Graham, you had a point.
It was a separate point really, but it was just a question about COVID. I mean, clearly MHRA has led the way with approval for many therapeutics and vaccines, but we're still in the pandemic and we're still seeing variants emerging quite quickly, which has implications for vaccines, particularly monoclonals. And I think we saw this week FDA approve a new monoclonal in a different way to be quicker. And I just wonder whether the MHRA has thoughts about whether the current processes are okay or whether we need to be doing anything differently to approve things quickly and responding to new variants in particular where there are therapies that patients need, particularly if they're not responding to vaccination.
Absolutely, it's not just for now, but it's for any future pandemic that we're looking to see how we can be more agile in actually adapting and supporting companies to adapt their vaccines or therapeutics. It poses quite an issue of change of regulation, as you've said. In the past, we've used ways to allow national choices rather than try to solve all this through regulation. But if we move to a more agile regulatory and, for example, the Valneva vaccine using immunobridging data, then conceivably we'll be much speedier in getting approvals of the current variant. It's been something that we've been only too conscious of, that some of the previously authorised products will not be effective against Omicron. So it's a matter of adjusting regulation, but actually looking right across the piece, not just from the system, but from the data that we would seek to be more speedy and more relevant. So a big turnaround, as you've highlighted, but teams working with Laura are on the case.
So I think actually what you're saying is that effectively the processes are going to continue to evolve.
Absolutely, and
using new
driven.
methodologies where we need it. Laura, is there anything else you want to add to that?
I think the only thing I'd add to that is international alignment is quite important on that as well, because I think one of the issues around this is certainty for industry and for developers of these products about how we're going to respond with different variants coming along. So that's all I'd add to it. We are actively looking at it, but also making sure that the international picture is aligned is also going to be important.
And learnings as well. I think it works both ways, isn't it? So, okay, I think that's helpful.
Yes, of the international guidelines on variants and how to adapt a vaccine, they're all slightly different. So Laura's right, it's a big job to do.
Okay, I think that's been a helpful discussion, June. I think you've given us a very good overview of what's currently happening in terms of activities within the agency. You've set some clear priorities for the next sort of month or two. So I think I'd recommend that we note the report. That gives us the operating context that we're working in at the moment. And thank you and the team for all the work that you're doing. Okay, that's great. I think that moves us on to the next report, which is page 25, which is around our delivery plan. And just to remind colleagues that what we did, and for members of the audience too, we built a 2-year delivery plan, quite deliberately to take us through the transformation of the agency to a sovereign regulator. This report is effectively the third quarter out of 8. John, obviously you can assume that we've read it, but are there any key points that you'd like us to note?
Thank you, Chair. Perhaps just 2 comments, I think, by way of context. So, as you say, this represents our third quarter of tracking progress against the delivery plan. When this paper came through our executive committee, one of our conclusions actually was we were in danger of adopting a slightly glass half empty approach, which is we were tending to focus on the kind of red and ambers and actually not looking at the greens and the blues that had been delivered. So hopefully we've tried to adjust that in this paper and celebrate the good work that has been done. The other comment, I think, by way of context, those of you that recall the delivery plan coming through for approval at the start, I did make the observation then that we tried to avoid scheduling too much in quarter two, quarter three, because we anticipated the new organisation of the agency forming and being embedded, and we thought there would be a distraction. And I commented at the time that I didn't think we'd be wholly successful. We were still scheduling quite a lot in those activities. So I think actually the delivery that has happened is particularly impressive given that background. So we're all happy to take any particular questions or comments, but I thought that was helpful by way of context.
Yeah, I think it's important for the board to hear the executive committee's conclusions from that work. Maybe I could just point the board to page 43, which I think actually, because there's a lot of words and there's a lot of tables in this particular paper, but actually for me page 43 actually just brings it all together on one page, and actually it's quite a visual representation. And I think it supports the point you were just making, John. There's a lot of green on there, and I think actually we should be very pleased to say we had a very ambitious plan in the first place, around our sort of scientific innovation, healthcare access, patient safety, dynamic organisation, collaborative partnerships and financial sustainability, with patient involvement threaded through every single one of those. So I think for me that's probably quite a good place for the board to look at the overall shape of this. And I think, having said that, I think it's probably worthwhile also maybe coming to the two red areas. So I'll come to Glenn in a moment on the devices component, but John, as you were leading on the paper, obviously we've got a red on the cash reserves. Can you just tell us what the implications of that are that the board should be aware of?
Well, as the board knows, we lose our trading fund status at the end of March, at which point we will lose access to those reserves. So for a number of months now, we've been running a process of looking at effective ways that we can use those reserves in that period. We've approved around 3 million of additional spend, which has still been subject to approval, so it is value for money in an attempt to use that. We're also continuing to discuss with finance colleagues in Department for Health and Social Care around elements of the reserves that we can retain. So potentially we've had some good news in that the CPRD NIHR funding of those reserves, it looks like we will be able to retain and use in future, reverting to the earlier conversation around the need to invest in CPRD systems. And in a smaller way, coming back to June's points on enforcement earlier, we do get funding through proceeds of crime. So as we seize assets, etc., we have access to those funding. And again, similarly, we've secured agreement that we can continue to use those funds going forward. So those two elements actually will help us in our reserves position, but it's red because there will still be a significant proportion that we will lose from 1st of April going forward.
Yeah, I think that shows how things are continuing to evolve, John. Actually, it's quite helpful because this report was up to the end of December. We're now in the middle of February, and clearly things are continuing to evolve. Glenn, in terms of the other one area around the devices legislation framework, can you just maybe describe in summary, some of the work that's going on to address that?
So the consultation was at the latter end of last calendar year, and that then closed with 900 responses, and HQA teams have gone through those and will be publishing responses in due course over the next couple of months, I believe. So where we are now is partnerships, HQA and safety are all working together to look at how we take this to the board, how we pick up when we bring the regime in, what's the approach, how do we also factor in things like response to coverage, for example. So there's lots to be thought about how we do the most appropriate path through to the regulation.
Okay, so I think you might say red on the chart, but the reality is there's a lot of work going on to establish exactly what we do, and we may well come back to that later as well, I suspect. So okay, I'd just like to sort of say welcome to the 7 colleagues who've been able to join us online. So we're now back on stream. So I'm really sorry and apologise on behalf of the agency that we weren't able to live stream from the beginning of the meeting, but you're very welcome, and thank you for your patience and forbearance while we got the technical gremlins resolved. So hello and welcome. So, colleagues, that's really an introduction to the delivery plan paper. Are there any other specific questions that anyone wants to raise? Catherine.
Really helpful summary. Thank you for doing the report. I note that some of the RAG ratings have moved from green to amber green or amber, and it's reassuring to see that that's low impact. But I just wanted to know, with new agency and we're in this new phase, what will be done to prevent further slippage in future deliverables?
So for a while now, we've tried to connect the delivery plan work up with our risk management framework, so that there is a read across between them. So actually, with a lot of the RAG status rating, it is intended to be more of a forward-looking view. So rather than just tracking, we're red because of historical slippage, etc., this is our view of coming forward, and that is generally underpinning the paper. So when we're making those assessments, we are factoring in the corrective action that the teams and the various chief officers are taking on those particular items.
Yeah, Michael.
Again, I think the summary here is very helpful. John, you've referred to the financial position. We'll come on to that later. I was interested here in your assessment of where we are as an agency for coming into Q4 now. Is there anything that is slipping, if that's the right word, that could have resource consequences for the next financial year that you haven't already factored in? I know there's reference here to digital and all the other stuff, but is there any fundamental thing that we, as a board, we ought to be worried about where that funding might come from?
To be honest, I'd agree with you, Michael. I think the key area is digital, the systems investments, which is, if we don't secure an element of transition funding for next year under the spending review, we will be making significant, in order to balance the books next year, we will need to make significant savings in terms of our project IT expenditure. So we will actually be doing very little systems investments next year in that situation, which particularly for things like the Sentinel replacement will move it back considerably right. So in my view, that's the key financial and delivery risk that we face at the moment. I don't know if Claire wants to comment on any aspect of that.
Yeah, Claire, do you want to maybe just describe your approach to how you're prioritising some of the requests that we've got?
So just looking at Plan B, C and beyond, and looking at that trade-off between investment spend and what we have now, but also looking at where we can work from a more continuous improvement approach rather than sort of bigger projects. So making smaller improvements in various areas across the agency, but not necessarily under a project that requires a lot of investment. So it is also just looking at that trade-off between the sort of repercussions of if we minimise investment and spend in one area, that ripple effect. And that's something I've been working on with my team, but it's something that I'll be bringing to my ExCo colleagues as well, where we can look at it as a collective and agree those priorities and those trade-offs if necessary.
Yeah, I think it's how we can maximise the use of the resources that we've got, and I think that does need a detailed review. So, I think it's definitely, we can't be in a situation where we say we can do no investment. That's not an option, because investment is required. It's a case of how we fund that.
Yeah, and there are different scenarios relating to the different types and amounts of investment and so on. So that's what's being worked on at the moment, and then, like I say, with ExCo colleagues as well. Great.
Okay, well, it's been a baptism of fire, but bear in mind you only joined the agency in December. But thank you to you and your team for the work that you're doing on that, Claire. Much appreciated. So, okay. Colleagues, any other questions around the delivery plan? Hayden?
Thank you, Chair. I had a question, and it was around the any assurance around the slippage of the medical device access framework. But I think, Glenn, you've addressed that, and so has John. I just wanted to make a point that I was really heartened to see the work around the common data model had been progressed and actually delivered earlier, because I think that's going to be really foundational for us going forward. So I just wanted to highlight that.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you for that. And I think actually what we shouldn't, again, when you look at the page 43, I think it just shows that we're doing a whole series of things in parallel here. This is a very, very, very ambitious programme, and I think we should be really applauding the efforts of the executive team on this, because actually we're trying to engineer a significant fundamental change to make us fit for the future, to transform into a sovereign regulator that has the ultimate financial sustainability, but also has the ability to keep up with medical technology advancements. And so I think there's a lot of really good things to be very proud of here. It's challenging, but I think there's good progress being made. And if there was one takeaway from this I think we're making good progress, Jude.
Great. Yeah, I agree.
So please keep up the good work, and we look forward to the Q4 report very soon, in 6 weeks' time, or just after. Okay, let's close that item and then move on to something completely different, as they say. So we'll note the report for assurance. Thank you very much. So page 44, we move on to another critical area for us, and that's health and safety. As an organisation, we've got a number of areas of our business that fundamentally health and safety is absolutely critical. So Mark, you and your team have written a paper that gives a good overview of that. You can assume we've read it, but are there any particular points you want to make on this?
Thank you very much, Chair. First of all, can I say just how pleased I am that this paper has been raised by the board. Health and safety is paramount, and there's a large amount of effort put across the agency to ensure that our staff remain safe. The paper captures what we have done to date, the systems that have evolved, and it's worth pointing out that the agency has a huge diversity of roles, and it has a huge diversity of health and safety challenges, from the laboratories at South Mimms through to the inspectorate to working through the offices here, and they all require a large amount of effort to make sure we have the best possible practice for health and safety. I'd like to say at this point a big thank you to a large number of staff. I won't name them all, but there are a large number of volunteers as well as the health and safety team who put in a lot of effort to make sure that we are safe and that to be supported. As we've mentioned several times in this meeting, we're now at the point of transformation, and this is a superb time to actually take a close look at the structure we have on health and safety, look to see where we can put in improvements and make sure it's fully embedded into the culture as we go forward, so we continue to be a safe agency. I'll pause there for questions.
Okay, there's a very wide amount of content here, colleagues. So, Mandy.
Yeah, thanks very much, Mark. I think it is very, very timely, and it's very easy to forget health and safety in periods of transformation. So there's a couple of points I had. One was the role of staff who take on health and safety roles that's not in their targets and recognised. I think that's maybe an easy win.
Mm-hmm.
I think that sends a very important message by the organisation as well, that it's a valued thing, not something people do in their spare time. And on a sort of broader piece, it's quite safety focused, the activities we're doing. And I wondered what else we're doing to both look at the health of our staff, given that the environment's changed with a lot more working from home, different dynamics. And also, I know it's the health and safety, but the environment, have we got any strategy towards net zero, both as an agency but also in the way we regulate as well, and whether that's something we need to look at.
Interesting. Mark, do you want to pick up the safety point first?
First of all, on the safety point, yes, you're absolutely right. We have a new challenge, which is remote working. Now, there is at the moment a big evolution across industry of what remote working is. And we're monitoring that, and we're seeing that health and safety recommendation for home workers is evolving. So we will continue to monitor, we'll continue to make sure that we've got the best possible support for our staff members who are working at home. We also have to ensure that their health is maintained, particularly mental health has come through in the pandemic. Now, mental health is supported by health and safety legislation, but is tend to be delivered by our HR department, and we have a series of welfare programs that we launched in the pandemic that we are continuing to put in place and support. Obviously, this is a vital area. We continue to try and monitor, so it is ongoing. It will be ongoing. What comes through post-pandemic, what support we need, the agency will continue to do that. And I thank my HR colleagues for working very hard on that.
Yeah, maybe just pause there, Mark. Maybe John, can I just bring you in, just as the Executive Director responsible for human resources? Is there anything else you want to add in terms of the wellbeing offer to our staff?
I don't think I've got a lot more to add to what Mark said, actually, which is, the two aspects do work very closely together. We do have the appropriate training. I think we continue to follow up. So, various elements of training are still on the mandatory training list. So people get chased basically to do it across the piece. That continues to happen. So actually, I think the work between the two teams is going well.
Yeah, you see, that strikes me as quite safety focused again. People, got the right sort of setup for their desks, and got the right. So it feels quite processy. I'm not sure that really addresses the health and well-being. But June, something we were talking about earlier about location maybe is part of that.
It would be really good to
a great place to work.
Exactly. That's where our executive team are focusing now. All the various elements that actually improve health and well-being, working together in a really, if you like, structured environment that may not mean that you're present for everything, but the tools and so forth that we have facilitate that work-life balance. So Mark's right, there's a lot of effort in this space. Perhaps it's a good time to take stock, particularly as we've been reminded of what's in the Levelling Up paper about relocation.
Yeah, so it strikes me to answer Mandy's question, I think there's a number of components around the health and safety, but I think Mandy makes a really valid point here. It's not just about safety is vitally important in high risk laboratories, clearly, but I think there's a well-being issue associated with all our office-based staff, or who wouldn't necessarily be in the high risk environment of a laboratory. So,
just on that well-being, so John and Mark have talked about some of the initiatives with our HR colleagues, but there are things going on across the agency within teams and volunteers, so mental health first aiders and so on. So there's that kind of support from colleagues who are trained as well. That's offered throughout the agency.
Yeah. And then I think just to complete the point, Mark, I think the other point Mandy was making was just around, let's not make it an add-on. So if people are spending a substantial part of their time supporting health and safety, build it into their objectives, I think is probably the request from Mandy. So, and I think that probably particularly applies in the laboratory sites.
I agree. And it does appear in objectives of many people. But yes, we should look to see where it should be occurred more widely across the objectives.
Yeah, make it systematic, don't make it just based on goodwill, I think is probably the request. So. Paul, I know you want to come in. Was it on this point? Because I want to finish the completion on the environmental question.
Yeah, it was. It was just on psychological health and culture, which we've talked about, and then ensuring a positive culture. So, as we do as a board, it's challenge the idea, not the person.
Yes. I think we'll definitely come back to the culture component, potentially in Mandy's report as well. Now, in terms of environmental standards and how we're building that into regulations, Laura, is there any initial thoughts that you've got around where the environmental agenda fits into our regulatory processes?
We haven't got a strategy yet, but I think you're right, Mandy. I think we need one because I think at the moment medicines and devices have an impact on the environment, energy and material consumption in the manufacturing and the transportation, and then there's also the disposal of waste, the disposal of both packaging and unused medicines. We've also got to think about the release of greenhouse gases from things like anaesthetics and inhalers, and then there's the excretion of medicines into the sewage. So lots of impacts these have. I think we need to think about what our strategy is, and there is some work. And there's a sort of, at the moment, we're looking at what are we doing about it, how we bring that into a strategy is something we need to think about. But also, it's a kind of health system thing as well. So how we work with the NHS on that, who are also really interested in that area. But it's definitely a piece of work that we've begun thinking of. But it's a gap. I think you're right that we need to move forward to fill.
And I think certainly talking to pharmaceutical companies and trade associations, it's quite clear that industry is very much thinking around this. And so I think this is probably something else that we're going to need to work on. Mark, did you want to come back on that?
I can also add that we also have a significant environmental effort by our facilities team. There has been a regular annual review on just how environmentally friendly our sites are, and we've shown consistent reductions in wastage and improvement of use of alternative energy, and they are active. We continue to push that forward. We also have to consider the fact that we are a life sciences research centre, and there's cross-industry efforts there to actually try and lessen the environmental impact of that work, and we will incorporate that into our strategy going forward to continue to be as environmentally friendly as possible.
You see, it strikes me there's two components here, isn't there? There's the internal, what are we doing about our own carbon footprint as an organisation, and then there's actually the wider point in terms of actually how we, try to ensure that we've got environmentally friendly and appropriate, medicines, devices and technologies going into the use in the marketplace.
There is an environmental test in the pharmaceutical legislation. As we look at our medical device legislation, we can similarly look to see if that's necessary to take a more driven approach, actually, and give us the tools. Things like PPE and landfill, very considerable toxicity to the environment.
Okay. Claire, you want to come back?
Yeah, just that there are green IT principles as well. So from a technology perspective, policies and regulations that we align to as well. So it's a tweak here and a tweak there, but everyone sort of does their bit from an agency perspective. I think it all contributes.
Yeah, it definitely does. I think the power that computing equipment takes is actually sometimes just assumed, but there's a footprint issue there in terms of carbon. So June, I'm just wondering what's the best way to maybe take this forward. Clearly there's a number of other things already going on. In terms of an environmental strategy?
We're on our way. I think we'll need to have some more strategic discussions at Exco, and our partnerships element will be key, possibly to hear about that.
Okay, Glenn?
Just been in contact with Nick Watts, who's the Chief Sustainability Officer of NHS England, and on previous jobs and previous occasions, I've been talking to him about regulators and the sustainability agenda. So we'll be bringing some thoughts from him to Exco and probably up to the board at some point.
Okay. Well, I think, John, do you want to come back?
Just to say that we're looking at the environmental impact reporting that we do for the agency itself, and that will be coming through as part of the annual report and accounts.
Right.
So we've been looking at how we map with the targets DHSC has set themselves against that, and as Mark was indicating, pretty good progress. The two main issues we have are we're a significant electricity consumer, and of course refrigerants are used extensively at NIBS.
Yeah. Okay. So I think what I'm hearing is the annual report will include, if you like, a historical report of what we've done. I think there's still a forward-looking component to how we can maybe be greener. To Claire's point, I think, and that's the internal agenda. And I think we then need to think about timing for something that's more externally facing, in terms of our environmentally friendly regulatory processes.
Absolutely.
So I think we probably
schedule it in.
I think we need
3 months.
I think we'll need to think about the timing for that. So let's just think about when we review the board schedule of business of what the right time for that is, and we can maybe pick that up on another occasion. But if we could just take an action, Carly, with you and Natalie, to sort of say we'll put on an environmental strategy needs to be developed with a timescale to be decided. Because I think we just need to figure out how that fits in with all of the other priorities that we've currently got. So it's important, but it's just a case of when. And I think we need a little time just to think that through. Is that okay with colleagues? Okay. Was there anything else as far as Mark's report? Mark also made a recommendation at the end of his report, that'll be on page 53, asking the board to schedule some health and safety leadership training for the board, in the same way that it's going through each of the leadership layers of the organisation. That seems like a perfectly reasonable and rational thing to request. I can't believe anyone would want to disagree with that. No? Good. Okay, so that's approved, Mark.
Thank you.
So we'll put that into the schedule of business. And similarly, actually, I think in terms of regular health and safety reporting, and maybe next time, let's try to make sure we pick up the health and the safety.
Yes, indeed.
Because I think that might be quite a nice add-on to that.
Agreed, Chair.
Yeah, that's great. So, and we'll schedule that in as well into the board schedule of business in due course.
Could I just pick up one thing I didn't quite catch from the document? So in you talk in there about the opportunity of the transition, which it seems clear.
Mm-hmm.
But you also talk about the risks of the transition, and I didn't quite capture what was meant by that from what was written. So, in terms of just thinking about biological safety, are there any short to medium term risks of the transition itself that you can identify?
The risk that I was referring to was risk around some of the containment facilities at the South Mim site. We don't want to start anything involving containment until we've made sure we've got all the staff trained. And we have a number of staff changing roles, so we've got training going on at the moment. So what we've done is actually just delay a couple of set of experiments just to make sure we're fully in place. And we're just working through that now, making sure that the training is adequate, the facilities are also maintained, they've all received regular servicing. So it results in some changes to schedule on activity, but that's what it was referring to.
Okay, great.
So it's important to say really clearly there is no risk.
There is no
because
risk.
it is being managed by phasing any new experimentation.
Absolutely, it is a phasing thing,
Yeah, that's what I wanted to hear.
ensuring that all the staff has the necessary training.
Yeah, so yeah, let's just be really clear about that. The risk is being managed very carefully. Okay, great. Oh, well, thank you for that. Let's note the report with thanks, Mark. And then the other area of assurance is from our two board committees. So this time we have a report from the Organisational Development and Remuneration Committee. Mandy, you're the chair, so you can assume we've read it, but what were the key points you think the board should note particularly?
Well, I think they fall into the three major pieces on the agenda. We welcomed the review of the services that the agency will deliver going forward. And this was really important to understand the resource requirements, the skills, and the delivery of our mission. So I think that helped us to see what the scale of the agency and what we can do in the short term and medium term. So a good piece of work would be trying to articulate this for some months, and I think this was the first time we felt that it had brought together everybody from the agency. So it was real credit to the team that they'd done that, and that's then focusing on delivering those core services which are going to have the biggest impact on patients, on our finances and on our staff going forward. So there's more work to do, and we don't want this to be theoretical. It will evolve as we learn more. But I think the committee were encouraged that there was a lot of collaboration and buy-in, and this wasn't something that was just a theoretical exercise. We will continue to monitor the progress around that and how effective that's been in terms of outputs, not just the inputs as well. We had a considerable discussion on leadership development, which the board had discussed in December, and I think that was very helpful in terms of developing this programme. We were much more encouraged that the plan is going much deeper into the organisation to demonstrate, so everybody in whatever role they're doing has some leadership responsibility. They might not be managing a big team of people, but leading a project or being an expert, that all has leadership characteristics. So making that much more embedded in the way the agency operates. Because I think there was a feeling before leadership was just for the exco and maybe the next level down. So I think that's very important. We talked a lot about actions speak louder than words, leading by example, and that also applies to everybody around the table here, is that we do set the tone very much for how the organisation operates. Also asked the board and the committee to support the team, either through mentoring, sharing experiences, and I know quite a lot of that is ongoing already, but I think the organisation is finding that very useful, and not just to Exco, but throughout the organisation. So that's something for us to continue to do going forward. So I think there's a plan that's now being developed by not by senior leaders and facilitated by HR, and we were very much discussed about how HR is an enabler, but leaders need to take the message through the organisation. This isn't an HR initiative, and I think compared to 12 months ago that is becoming embedded in the organisation. So I think the board should be encouraged that those messages are going forward. So again, committee will continue to monitor progress, both in terms of metrics, but also in terms of success stories, because metrics don't always tell the whole story, particularly with leadership. And then we talked a little bit about culture, and although that was mainly focused on the feedback from the recent survey and the balanced scorecard, about leaders walking the talk and taking timely decisions, where performance was a lot lower perhaps than expected, and that's what's required as seen from the survey. And we also discussed the internal audit recommendations around improving governance and responsibilities and timelines for actions around the culture improvement plan. This was very strongly linked again with the leadership development, in terms of a lot of culture is set by the way we do things rather than just training programs. So that was sort of linked together, but recognise that those actions and the culture metrics, although useful, need to be embedded in the way we work together. So we'll continue to do that monitoring, but again, it was very important to roll out the culture action plan, because a lot of that is about how people operate, and the metrics again don't tell the whole story. We want to, and the committee was asking for examples and perhaps feedback from within the organisation, not just perhaps what's coming from what ExCo is seeing. So again, I think we're seeing good progress, a lot more about embedding and doing things rather than this is the theory. There was a very good diagnosis done of the culture of the organisation. We now need to take that and individual teams and leaders working that through the organisation, recognising we're going through a big period of change, which is both a risk but also a great opportunity. So I think we were encouraged that there was progress being made.
See, I think that feels quite tangible actually, Mandy, so I'm really pleased to hear that progress is being made, and I'll come to June in a moment to talk about what she's doing with her leadership team. But what about things that still need to be done? Because progress is great. What did the committee conclude were the 2 or 3 key things that really need to be addressed urgently?
Well, the main thing that needs to be addressed is setting the priority services, the things that we do well, that have the biggest impact on public and patient health. Yeah. And we have 6 priority services which have been identified, and we need to make sure that we are delivering against those, yeah. And delivering both to time and budget, and with the right leadership. And that will actually help to drive the culture of the organisation as well, because it's putting patients at the centre of those services, it's delivering with our budget, we just can't do everything theoretically. So it's learning by doing and changing by doing. So those 6 priority services are pretty key. And I know Alison, you've been involved with that, and Laura quite heavily in some of those things. Okay. So that's where we wanted to focus. That's why we've banged on quite a lot about services. Yeah. Because that's the vehicle for doing things, but both in delivering the mission of the agency, but also in changing the way people think and do things. Okay.
I'll maybe come to the chief officers in a moment just to say a little bit about some of the services that are being developed. But June, first, can I just come to you and just ask, I know you've been getting your new leadership team together. Can you just maybe describe some of the process for the benefit of the whole board of what you've been doing in that area?
We now have a one agency leadership group of about 30 to 35, we say at level 2 to 3, coming together in a very, shall I say, egalitarian way, equal voices, to look at the priorities that will determine leadership and culture. And now that we've met twice, I can safely say we have all contracted in to be this leadership and to influence the way the organisation's going to get to where we need to get to with transformation, really use the opportunity. And one example is simply an excellent piece of work on growing our talent, which had everyone engaged a few days ago, in terms of how we use every tool but actually make it part of everyone's job. We have so many opportunities at the moment for talent, for wherever it is in the agency, to be much more able to be moved into where those opportunities are, and let's surprise ourselves by what we can be offering people as a big step in their own personal development. So it is going to be the lifeblood of the agency, and I think it's been well described by Mandy. It's not simply HR's job, it's one that we are doing as chief officers, all together, to be testing ourselves, to be judging ourselves by our performance in developing and growing talent. So that's just one aspect of the story. I'll just quickly say something about the services. I feel we've turned a corner, actually. And it very much bridged from the board discussion, consolidate, get the basics right. And I think that is absolutely the corner we've turned in those 6 priority areas.
Yeah, okay. And maybe just thinking about pillars of innovation, access and safety. Mark, from a service point of view, what's the main sort of service areas in your area that you're working on?
We've identified 9 service areas, obviously, and discussed by the board ILAP as a service, but also innovation and the advice giving, the work of the Innovation Accelerator to support. We have a very active research area in South Mems, and we're looking to see what kind of research services we can build on existing partnerships to improve. The batch release, which the CEO has mentioned, is of course supporting about 1,000 different biological medicines, and we want to grow that as an international comparability service and build on some of the education. And our biological reference materials, we have over 1,300 different reference materials supporting a wide range of disease states and therapeutic questions. How do we deepen that profoundly?
And of Mandy's big 6, which one was in your? Which one or two were in your area?
Well, I'd say very much the innovation chair. First and foremost, we're innovating at every level.
Yeah. Okay. And Laura, from a service point of view, what are the key services that you're?
Obviously, we plug into the innovation as well from innovative medicines, and also thinking about innovative devices and how that works. But in terms of service workshops, that we've started a series of service workshops on 2 biggies in my area. One is about the services we deliver on established products.
Yep.
And I've been. You mentioned health before as well as safety, and some of that is about engagement and how people feel about the transformation, and there's been a lot about recruitment and posting in posts, and this is good to start thinking about the future and how we deliver. So I've been delighted with the level of engagement that we've had. So we had a workshop that came up with some key areas that we need to look at on established products. How we make the risk-benefit decision in a quicker way, where we don't have to refer it to Europe. Do we have to have long reports? Some really simple things like that. How we get the product information that we put out right. Again, there are some simple things that we can do on there, some longer-term things we can do to try to have different availability of standard product information to help people get it right first time. And then the other thing is a consistent approach to risk. There's a lot of what is risky. We've got very, very skilled assessors who can make decisions on what is risk. How do we do that consistently across everything that comes in? So there's a consistent view from the perspective of the patient. I mean, obviously the expert committees have a role in that. That consistent approach to risk links to a second set of workshops that are going on at the moment, which is around what we do with not only inspections but actually compliance, and calling it compliance, because compliance is a spectrum of behaviours.
what you need to do to achieve compliance depends on the source behaviour. So there's sort of everything from education right through to linking into enforcement. And where does the inspection work we do fit in? Where's the best way to use that? So there's work going on that as well, which is also quite interesting. So that covers two big areas, but I think essential and important service areas that we need to get right.
Yeah. You see, I think that sounds great because it's got a very strong external focus. It's going to have benefits on patients, and it's just pulling these things together. So there's a natural link from there, from innovation to access, and then obviously to safety. You mentioned risk. So Alison, what are the key service areas in your area?
It has to be safety surveillance, obviously. We've already talked about how CPRD are going to contribute to some of the innovation earlier on in terms of clinical trial recruitment, but also in terms of a lot of the observational research that they do, which is quite substantial. And we talked about common data models earlier, but really in terms of safety and surveillance, our predominant activity is building the best possible and most comprehensive safety surveillance platform so that we can proactively identify signals as early as possible and then mitigate appropriately. And I know Michael will talk later about the Safety Connect platform, and that's a key pillar really in our new system, but to improve not only our medicine safety but also our devices safety, and that's probably one of our key activities going forward.
Yeah, so I think we've talked about transformation a lot over the last sort of few years, and actually this is starting to make it come real, and so I'm really enjoying the examples that have been used. Claire, you want to add something?
I would like to add something. So I was pleased to hear your definition of leadership, Mandy. So it's not just associated with managing large teams. And the reason I say that is particularly in DDAT, so digital data and technology, it is relevant as we have a lot of emphasis on leadership in specialisms. So the people who tend to work in those professions have a love of technology rather than, say, a love of management. And so in the tech community, we do a lot of work to support career progression in that way for specialisms. And I don't think it's too tenuous a link, but we talked about well-being earlier. So again, if you think in an agency like ours, the different types of personalities, so introverts, extroverts, and the sort of preferences and so on, it's just ensuring that we enable that space and flexibility that accommodates those differences. And just my last point related to what you were talking about, Laura, and the workshops and so on that we've been collaborating on. Again, space there for leadership in thinking and the art of the possible, and you don't have to necessarily be senior or a leader to contribute to that as well. So I think we do need to strongly advocate that too, that type of leadership as well.
So important actually, I think there. So, okay, colleagues, any other specific questions? Mercy?
One comment and one question. So I like the equality, diversity, inclusion principles permeating the leadership plan. So that was just my comment. Well done on that. And I'm sure that's coming to the board anyway, isn't it?
It will do.
Yeah. So we can have a look at that. The other was really about mentoring and reverse mentoring, because I think that's really important. So maybe something really for the chief officers more than Mandy, but obviously Mandy, you can comment because that's really an interest of mine as well, especially the reverse mentoring for the board. I mean, it's really useful for us too.
Yeah, and there was quite a lot of discussion around that, and there was a sort of willingness certainly from the ODRC members to partake in that, and also I think it's relevant to our board development.
Yeah.
But I think it's terms of, again, it's leading by example as well. It's really important, and to the reverse mentoring helps you see the challenges people in the organisation are feeling, which might not always permeate up. And I think it also, I always talk about the shadow you cast as a leader, and it's really important, and sometimes you don't realise how long or short your shadow is.
Yeah, sometimes shorter than you think. I think it's fair to say. So reverse mentoring, we've talked about this before. How can we make this happen? Because actually I would love to do some reverse mentoring personally, but how do we actually make it happen? John, it sounds like it's an HR opportunity to provide the opportunities or to collect.
Well, to be honest, we have an existing scheme that takes place within the agency, so I'm sure it could be expanded with no issues.
Yeah. So could you ask one of your team to make contact with board members to see if they're able to contribute in some way? But I think it's a good example of leading by example, and I would certainly volunteer my services, and I hope other colleagues would as well. So okay, so we take that as an action, just to follow up in terms of practically how do we make this happen. That'd be great. Any other thoughts or comments? Hida.
Thanks, Jay. I just wanted to say a couple of things, because this was my first Organisational Development Committee meeting, and we talked a lot about the organisation, the transition it's going through, and culture and things like that. And I have to say, I was really heartened to hear about the work that we're doing, especially around moments of value and really diving down into each of the strategic priorities that we've been talking about. I personally think that's exactly what the organisation needs at a time of massive transition, so much change going on, and change always brings a lot of worry and a lot of uncertainty. So it was great to see that depth of work that is going on, that I hope brings people a little bit of reassurance that we are heading in the right direction, and it will work at the end. I just wanted to ask really an open question around taking timely decisions, because I think that was the two things that were highlighted, that as leaders we're not doing enough walking the talk and taking timely decisions. And I hope that the work that we do, diving deep into the moments of value and really mapping out, really impressive the work that we're doing there, mapping out new workflows, utilising new technologies. I hope that helps us to get on that path of taking timely decisions. I mean, it's such a huge area, and it reflects on culture and how we build that culture in as well. But overarching statement was, I think I gained a lot of assurance by really diving down into the depth of all the different things we've done, and that was really great to see.
And June, is that something that you could maybe pick up with your leadership group in terms of timely decision making?
Absolutely. In fact, we've already been exploring it with the executive team, and it's something that will come out in a number of ways. Laura's talked about the workshop, which will look at the risk proportionality, and that's not a one-off, but the training, the mentoring, all support a good enough decision in a prompt time, and giving people that freedom, unlike the very formulaic approach of being part of Europe, that there were certain quite intricate and complex steps that you just had to take. So it is a big culture shift, but we're putting the building blocks in place. And then in parallel, looking at our own governance to make sure that it's easily navigated, if it needs to be navigated at all, that people feel in command of how they will get the right decision in a reasonable and speedy time frame. So it's something to have constantly in view, and we'll take a temperature again with our next survey of staff, but actually to put some positive steps in place, that a prompt, good enough decision is better than a perfect one that takes a long time. So it's very much on the table.
Yeah. And I think it just shows the benefit of actually sort of having a very clear delivery plan, because actually all of this work on transformation, all the work on culture and leadership is all based around enabling scientific innovation, accelerating healthcare access, and strengthening patient safety. That's what we're about. So I think it feels like all these things are starting to really come together alongside having an agile, responsive organisation, which is clearly what dynamic organisation is about. Collaborative partnerships, keep looking externally about how we can support the external environment, and then making sure we have a sustainable model with, as I said before, patients at every step of the process. So it feels like we're delivering the plan that we set out, which I think again is yet more reassurance to the delivery plan, actually, from my perspective. Okay, so colleagues, are we assured that we're on the right track? I'm getting a sense we are.
Yep.
So thank you, Mandy. We'll note the report with thanks, and actually just encourage continued progress. I think particularly in the area of services, and particularly in the area of constantly striving leadership development at every level. Okay, and that brings us on quite nicely to the next assurance report, and that's from the Audit and Risk Assurance Committee. So, Michael, as the chair of the committee, you can assume we've read the report, but any key points you want us to note?
Yes, Chair, and what I'm going to say is it should be prefaced by clear recognition of all that the agency is achieving and continues to achieve. I'll focus first on the meeting that we had on the 25th of January, and then there was a joint meeting that we had with the Patient Safety and Engagement Committee. I get the abbreviation mixed up, and so I make sure I got the title right there. So if I start with the first meeting that we had. Again, I say that there are many good positive things, particularly around learning lessons, around preparation for this year's annual report, and the way in which the external audit will be undertaken. However, there was a bit of an elephant in the room that I think we all are aware of, and that is in 22-23, the agency does face a financial deficit, and the issue that we really wanted to focus on was could we take assurance that sufficient action was being taken to manage those issues or those areas that were within our direct control as an agency to ensure that we maximised revenue, minimised expenditure in a way that benefited patients. So our conclusion is that the agency has identified what it needs to do, particularly around fees, around digital transformation, around corporate overheads, and around system redesign. I think what we were saying though is that we wanted a bit more assurance that that was being done to a realistic timetable, and that should be a bit more transparent about what that timetable is, with key appropriate milestones being in place. So for example, on fees, we know that we have to resolve this by the end of, I think it's 2022-23, but I'd be looking for more of a plan with milestones as to when the key things are going to be delivered. I know Claire is doing some excellent work on revisiting the digital transformation programme, but again there are key strategic items that we need to be focusing on, particularly investment in Safety Connect. So the sooner that we can resolve some of these issues and we've got transparency around what we're going to be doing and by when, I think is the fundamental challenge that the agency faces going forward, and I would strongly recommend that the board needs more assurance on that over the next over the next 3 months before we get into the next financial year. I say that not only because it's important to the agency's financial performance, but I also think we need to recognise that with the loss of trading fund status, that we come much more closely aligned with the Department of Health. And if I was in the Department of Health, these are the questions I would be asking of the agency, so being able to demonstrate that is particularly important. I think John and colleagues would recognise that there's a lot on, so what that means is that progress with preparations for the change in trading fund status have not been as speedy as finance and the executive would like. But I think it relates to Mandy's point, there is a real cultural change that is needed here, in that the type of reporting that will be required by the department will be, I suspect, much more forensic and much more detailed. And that's not just finance, that's the whole organisation. So there needs to be a better understanding of what that means. Now, again, I know that a project board is being established and that's all very good. But again, the message I would give is that needs to be taken very seriously as we move forward. I'd stop there, Chair, if anybody wants to ask questions. But you asked earlier, what are the things that need to be done from this committee, and those are the things. And in fairness to June, June and I met separately, and I have no doubt about June's commitment to taking this forward, supported by John and others.
Yeah, let's just pause there for a moment, because I think we should come back to Safety Connect component as well in the joint meeting. But John, I'm just thinking, obviously I know that you and your finance team are well aware of the financial implications, but I'm more interested in how you and your team are engaging the rest of the organisation, because actually we need every manager across the organisation to be managing their cost centre, not the finance department. You know, we need to have systematic reporting across the organisation, not just in the finance team. So I'm interested in what you're doing around the wider engagement on this.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, after I think what was a very helpful session at Audit Assurance Committee, we have taken that on board. So particularly the HR team are working with sort of comms colleagues around the kind of wider engagement that we need to have. Michael's point that we need to have a clear team, a clear plan in place. I think that was in place in the finance areas, but not necessarily on an integrated basis. We now have a project manager in place who is specifically tasked with getting that integrated plan in place and managing it appropriately. I think the risk aspects of it are slightly heightened by the timing of the spending review. So DHSC finance colleagues are indicating that we will not know the outcome of that until possibly the end of March. So whereas we'd previously been intending to take a scenario-based approach to our budget, we've concluded, and we'll be discussing this at EXCO tomorrow, that actually we need to assume the worst case, which is we don't get the ask for the spending review. So the budget we put in place will assume that. We can always add in extra items if there is funding, but if we get to a situation where on the 1st of April it's a unfavourable outcome, it will then take time to make those adjustments. So that's the approach we're taking forward. So I think we will have the budget and plan in place. There is considerable work that needs to be happen. So as well as populating the organisation, we need to reflect, boring stuff like revised chart of accounts, organisation structures in our ERP systems, such that we can report against the new organisation. So that's underway, but it's unlikely to be in place until early April, May. So that work's underway.
Yeah. So I don't think it can wait till May, John. It just really can't, because we can't run this organisation blind. Is my initial reaction. So I understand it takes time, but let's not think about May as a potential acceptable date here for that. I think it also links quite nicely with the last board discussion that we had around the balanced scorecard, because in some ways the balanced scorecard should really be the summary of all of the component parts. So I think as we're building a new reporting mechanism, and we're looking to see on the board agenda next month, actually what does that look like at the board level. Presumably there will still be the levels below that for each group, and then each management team to be able to work to as well, I'm hoping. Is that the case?
That's certainly the intention on the balanced scorecard. I should have mentioned that in the finance area, a couple of months ago we took a senior member of the team out full time and backfilled her to work on the trading fund transition. So I believe the financial aspects of that are well under control and underway. It is the wider cultural ones that actually will take longer and require time to progress.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's helpful. Were there any other specific questions about the financial component of Michael's report, and then we'll maybe go on to the Safety Connect portion in a moment?
I'll just say some of the things around the wider cultural change, which I absolutely understand, but that's underpinned by more objective measures like managing your budgets within a department. So having the information from finance, but managing those things, and that's going to be really helpful in what we're trying to achieve with the Culture Action Plan as well. So there's a bit of a chicken and egg situation here, but I think ensuring budget holders have their information from finance is going to help us the transition, with or without the change in the systems and chart of accounts. There's some of those basic things that need to happen quickly.
Yeah, I mean, to be clear, we will absolutely have a budget, by the new organisational structure in place, effective 1st of April.
Good.
So we will have that control mechanism. It's fair to say there's a lot of play in the system at the moment.
Yeah, I understand it's work in progress, John, and that's perfectly fine. Okay, Michael, you and Mercy's groups got together to talk about Safety Connect. I'll ask Mercy's view in a moment, but what was your take on Safety Connect?
May I say one other thing in relation?
Please.
Yeah, no, please, and I will get on very quickly. The only other thing that I would bring to the board's attention is really good news in the sense that I think it's in the public domain. The new contract has been awarded to manage our internal IT systems. I think this is a major development, but it's also a risk. We want to get the benefits of that, and we need to be absolutely confident that we are an intelligent commercial customer of that supplier. And Mandy and I have agreed that periodically we will look at that as a joint committee, because I think the board will need assurance on that going forward. So I just wanted to
on the basis that technology is the key enabler through a lot of the change we want to implement.
If I could go on to the next point very quickly on Safety Connect. We had a meeting of the two committees. I think I'll speak for Mercy in a moment, but we were incredibly impressed by Safety Connect and the potential that it has to improve patient safety and the quality of information that it would generate. For members of the public watching this, the programme is a number of projects with the primary aim, the very important aim, of improving the comprehensiveness and quality of information on medical devices and medicines that will improve patient safety. So, really impressive. We had a very good discussion around risk. We also focused on the new governance structure that's been put in place, and I think what was encouraging, building on June's earlier comments, this seems to be the organisation coming together, looking at it from different aspects, which is really encouraging as well. The risks are still there around technology, the scale of data transfer required, but the one risk that I think is the most interesting, and I think Alison and I have talked about this, and if I draw on my previous experience over many years looking at reports that have gone to the Committee of Public Accounts, what you've got here is a major programme that has multiple benefits to public health, but it cannot be delivered solely by the MHRA. It is very much dependent on it being fully integrated and understood by the NHS, industry and medical practitioners. And if we don't get that buy-in, we will not get the quality of information on patient outcomes that can really benefit patient health and patient safety. And this is something the public sector does not get right over and over again. And so the big risk for us, I think, is that outreach to other organisations across the wider public sector. And I think that's where we need the Department of Health, NHS Digital, all of those players, and engagement. And Stephen, you'll know from your other work, engagement with the NHS about what this means. So that, for me, all the other risks were important, but that was the fundamental risk that I think needs very careful management. I haven't deliberately spoken about patient engagement. It's really for Mercy, so I don't know, Mercy, if you wanted to add.
Mercy, any quick observations from your perspective?
Well, just how useful it was to bring both committees together to get the same briefing. Usually on the Patient Safety and Engagement Committee we get bits of Safety Connect coming to us so we can drill down, but getting the overview of the 5 projects and how they come together and those interdependencies was really, really useful for us. And also to have Eric there looking at kind of what the key risks are. And I have to agree with Michael as well. It's that not only what we need internally, but really having that partnership to really deliver on the huge potential of Safety Connect, which could make a huge difference to patient safety. So it's such an important area for us. But it was very useful to have both committees really kind of looking at it, looking at clear accountabilities, through to the board for us as well. And
but looking at it through the 2 different lenses.
Exactly.
So Alison, I think there's a lot of endorsement there, and I know you talked in your Cumberledge review report last month actually about the Safety Connect being a critical component of that key deliverable, because actually what Baroness Cumberledge was talking about was joining up different parts of the health system. So yes, it's a risk, Michael, but it's also a strategic imperative. We've got to find a way through it to make it happen. But any final observations from you on that?
Yeah, just to pick up on Michael's point about getting buy-in from the whole healthcare ecosystem, and we've talked about how can we use technology to improve that. And I think in the discussion we talked about secondary care and how do we interact better with secondary care. How can we use API strategy to go in and get reports and get data instead of necessarily relying on sort of the individual to report to us? How can we be more proactive in terms of that? How can we reach out to patients more so they're aware of it? Mercy, we talked a lot about how the programme will allow us to interact more with the patient provide better feedback, provide more information around what our activities are on risk mitigation, provide more information about their product and how they use it. So I think that's a really key element. But I think what we need to do is use technology solutions to report the sort of burden of reporting, and try and reduce duplication of that reporting and bring all those streams together. So I think there's sort of avenues, but we are going to be launching or have a common strategy around how we can improve the visibility of the new platform.
That's great. Okay, and Claire, anything you want to add from a technology point of view?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots to say about that, but I think the data strategy as well, that
we'll link that together.
We're co-authoring and work's well underway on that. That's a lot of the things that Alison just mentioned then, and more in other conversations. It underpins and supports all of those aspects too. Okay.
Well, I'm glad the experience of two assurance committees coming together to look at the same topic. So once for the executives, but actually through two different lenses. I don't think we should do that on everything, but I think selectively use of that sounds like it could be very, very helpful. So, okay. Any further thoughts on this particular topic? No, great. Okay, well, thank you very much, Michael, and also to Mercy's committee too. I think we can note the assurance, and I think actually, Michael, there's going to be another ARAC meeting in the next few weeks to follow up on some of the outstanding actions that are required before the year end.
Yes, that's right.
So we'll be hearing from you again shortly, at the next meeting probably. Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. So that brings us to a conclusion on the main items on the board agenda. So now we've got the opportunity for some questions from members of the public. So again, apologies again to anyone watching this recording afterwards, or to the small number of people who've been able to join us latterly. We do luckily have some pre-submitted questions. We're joined by Rachel Bosworth on screen, who is our Director of Communications. Rachel, can we just check the technology works? Can we hear you?
Yeah, morning Stephen, morning everyone.
Excellent, we can hear you and we can see you, so that's fantastic. Again, apologies again to members of the audience. The technology worked perfectly yesterday, it just didn't work at 10 o'clock this morning, so I'm very sorry about that. So Rachel, we did have, I think, half a dozen pre-submitted questions. So would you like to just take us through them one at a time, please? And the first question, please, if you can.
Yes, of course. So the first question is, what is the MHRA doing to support the innovation of medicines?
Okay, Mark, that sounds like it's in your area. Can we come to you?
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you very much for the question. We've talked a bit this morning about what we're doing for innovation. It's worth bearing in mind there's a lot of internal processes and the whole transformation to improve our services to innovation. I'm just going to highlight a few of the external things we do. We have an innovation office which provides technical advice, and I direct the questioner to the website to see the details of it. We're busy improving that as part of one of our services to effectively turn it into an innovation accelerator to get much more value into the advice we give. We will be talking about the work we do on clinical trials and devices, the work there we're trying to bring innovation into legislation, and the guidance we provide to improve the clinical trial impact. We have our clinical practice research data link for our CPRD. We've mentioned the significant number of database research services that we provide, and that's constantly growing. We have laboratory research, which is often done in partnership with a number of innovators to develop new reference materials, and it's for public health need, but also technology developments. We work significantly across the fields of vaccine development, disease surveillance, diagnostics, and advanced therapies, and novel therapeutic drugs, just to support and broaden out the science we use to make regulatory decisions. One of the most high-profile work is the Innovative Licensing and Access pathway, where we bring in new tools to support innovative products as they develop, and in return we're seeing an increase in the range of innovations that are being brought into the ILAC pathway. So we are continuously looking to improve how we support innovators, but we have a large number of approaches to doing so. Thank you.
Okay, that's a very long list, Mark, but thank you very much. If there was one key thing out of that long list in terms of supporting innovation, what would you say it is?
It's the advice.
It's the advice.
If we get the communication from the innovator, we've got all the other tools I've described to actually start supporting them and more.
Yeah. And I think actually something that's probably important for members of the public, again, is the fact now we've separated the advice being in the innovation group, that's then got a firewall with the regulatory group in terms of making the decisions.
Correct.
So I think actually we've got a very robust way of actually handling this from a conflict of interest point of view.
Indeed, I agree.
So that's great. Okay, Rachel, back to you.
Yeah, thank you. So the next question is about COVID vaccinations, and the questioner says that they have many friends, family and work colleagues who have been adversely affected by vaccinations, and many people know of others who have suffered. There are many stories about sports people collapsing in front of the public, and women experiencing miscarriages have increased dramatically. Can you clearly explain how all these adverse reactions, as well as linked vaccine deaths, are being investigated, and how will the public receive the findings of these investigations?
Okay, a whole series of questions in that. Alison, over to you.
So thank you very much for the question. I think I have a slide actually, and I wanted to start by walking you through the journey of a yellow card. So if we could go into, so when your yellow card comes from the reporter, so it could be a healthcare professional, it could be a patient, and we receive those reports in different ways, as I've tried to illustrate there. It could be via your phone, it can still be via paper report, or it could indeed be via the website. And when each and every report comes in, it's stored, if you go to the next please, onto our system, and then it's analysed very, very carefully. So we look at each and every report, we assess it, we compare it against what's known in our database. If you move on, we analyse via a number of different analytical procedures. Is this something we expected? Is this something in our product information? Is this more than we would expect to happen under a normal situation? What is our baseline reporting? If we're particularly concerned about a particular adverse event that we received, we will do a very careful assessment of that. And then if we go next, please, we will then discuss with colleagues, discuss with our expert committees, go and seek external, our independent advice through our Commission on Human Medicines, but also other expert advisory groups. And once we've reached our conclusion and that advice has been received, we will then take regulatory action next, please. And that may be communicated through a number of routes, either through our drug safety update bulletins, but also through a number of other mechanisms that we have to share this advice and share the conclusions of our assessment. So I just wanted to illustrate really the process that each and every card goes, every report that we received goes through. So if we can bring that down, and I'll talk more specifically about the question itself. And I just wanted to start by saying that we need to remember that since the vaccination campaign started, over 135 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines in the UK have been administered, and vaccination remains the single most effective way to reduce deaths and severe illness from COVID-19. It's estimated it's saved tens of thousands of lives, not only in the UK but globally, and even more hospitalisations have been avoided. But it's really important to reassure anybody who might be watching, but the general public, that any suspected adverse events are identified very quickly, and that's because at the start of the vaccination campaign we launched a very comprehensive safety monitoring strategy for the COVID-19 vaccines, and that's been published online on our website, and you can look at it there in much more detail. But just to emphasise that the strategy incorporates a number of different approaches and methodologies to be as comprehensive as possible, and to, as I said, to understand, is this particular event something that is happening more frequently than we would expect under a normal circumstances. And every week we publish a report on adverse events that we've seen and we've received with the COVID-19 vaccines. That's a very comprehensive report. And this extensive real-world experience has demonstrated these vaccines are safe and effective to use. one last point I really want to emphasise is that multiple epidemiological studies, as well as analysis of our yellow card data, have demonstrated there is no increased risk of miscarriage following vaccination, and there is no evidence of increased birth or pregnancy outcomes either. It's very important to emphasise that. And we have a very extensive section within this weekly report describing the safety of vaccines in pregnancy, but also in breastfeeding. So lastly, Chair, just to say that safety is of paramount importance to the MHRA, and I would like to reassure each and everyone that we take every report of a suspected adverse drug reaction, vaccine reaction in this case, but also a drug reaction or a device reaction very seriously, and we continue to monitor the COVID-19 vaccines very closely. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Alison. I think that demonstrates a very systematic approach, I think is what you're describing. Detailed analysis of each individual event being reported. There's a transparency with the publication on the website, and the overall conclusion is that the benefit risk is of the vaccines of COVID is very much in the favour of benefit.
Absolutely.
So therefore, we would regard them safe and effective to use, which is why they've been used on so many hundreds of millions of people around the world. Okay, thank you for that. So Rachel, the next question, please.
Okay, so the next question picks up that the agency did a remarkable job in fast approval of COVID vaccines, but the questioner is asking, what else does the agency do to ensure that other new or innovative medicines are available quickly for patients?
Okay, that sounds like a very good question too. So Laura.
Thank you. Yeah, we did do a remarkable job, and thank you for saying that, and continue to do so, I think, also, not only with the approval of vaccines, and I would emphasise the connections there with Alison's team at the point of authorisation of a new vaccine to be sure that we're clear about the safety follow-up, but also with the approval of new drugs to treat the disease, whether those were completely new active substances or whether they were repurposed medicines. We have also been instrumental in making sure there was an availability of medical devices to tackle the pandemic, from ventilators to lateral flow tests. And you will have heard in Dame June's report earlier that we approved the 5th COVID vaccine developed by Novavax, and also extended the use of remdesivir and approved Paxlovid, all treatments for patients with COVID-19. So we've learned a lot from this. We've learned a lot from COVID, the value of early engagement with developers, parallel review processes, the importance of scientific advice about trial design and about the use of real-world evidence. But the question is really what more we need to do. We've given a high priority to COVID vaccines and treatments during the pandemic, which is appropriate to do in a public health emergency like this. And as we move forward and continue to think about how we live with COVID, then we need to think about our priorities and how they should adjust. COVID vaccines don't actually go through the NICE process for cost effectiveness, but other drugs will need to. And so we've already mentioned the ILAP, the Innovative Licenses Access Pathway, and the partnership there, which is very, very important for faster access to innovative drugs that are other than vaccines. We also need to take full advantage of being outside the EU, streamlining some of our processes, and we talked about that earlier in the discussions, particularly focusing on established products and focusing on the added elements that really add value to the decision-making process, and that work began last month, as we said. And we need to build our global partnerships. So Orbis is a really important partnership for promising cancer medicines, and we need to think about regulatory misalignments when they might be a barrier to UK access. So something we're looking at now in the development of the devices framework. So speed of access actually depends on the whole product life cycle, as I think from what I've just said will probably demonstrate. So we've talked about real-world evidence, and in December we published guidance on the use of real-world evidence, and there is the consultation now on the clinical trials. So there was a lot more that we are doing and that needs to be done. Dynamic organisation, we need to close the feedback loops and make sure we learn from the patient experience. So I think I'll probably finish off by saying that whilst access is in my job description, it's achieving faster, safer access for patients is really a one agency mission. Yeah. So it's about the full product life cycle, and that's how we're tackling it on all those fronts.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Laura. I think that just demonstrates we are learning from the positive experiences of COVID, so we can apply that across the board. And it's a one agency approach. It's not just you and your team in that regard. So I think that's very helpful. Rachel, another question, please.
Yes, thank you. And we're going to move on to the topic of mesh, which is a subject we've received questions on in the past. And so I've pulled a couple of different questions together in this one, as they were all about aftercare for patients who've had mesh implanted. So the questioners are asking for an update on the status of UK mesh centres and also actions to inform patients when there's a safety issue or a recall of a medical device.
Okay. Alison, this sounds like another one for you.
Yeah, and just to say thank you to everyone who's raised questions to the public board regarding mesh. If I don't answer your specific question today, we will pick those up in writing afterwards. Before just going to that specific question, I just wanted to highlight again that we are planning a wider network session on mesh as soon as possible to understand how we can best engage with a range of people who have an interest in mesh, including patients with that lived experience of mesh. And we hope that that will provide a useful forum to better inform people of the sources of help that's available to them. And we also believe this is the most effective method of seeking views and engaging with the widest possible range of stakeholders to inform all of our decision making and our regulatory processes on the safety of mesh, but more importantly, our approaches to reduce harm. And some more details on that and how to register will follow as soon as possible. But if I turn more to that specific question, which was about that aftercare, but also about maybe the actions that we take to inform patients more generally when there's a safety issue or a recall of a medical device. And I think that's actually been raised in the chat as well, so it gives me an opportunity to raise this. So we do have a number of routes by which we receive information and also inform patients and healthcare professionals of any safety concerns. So first of all, the manufacturer has a legal obligation to inform the healthcare system when they're aware of a safety issue with a medical device, and that includes if that device is being recalled. And of course, we also receive reports direct from patients and healthcare professionals of safety concerns around medical devices through our yellow card systems. And of course, we're continually looking at the literature and discussing with international regulators around any safety concerns with medical devices. So a number of routes by which we can receive information or any concerns. When we do receive a concern, we publish information on our website to ensure it's publicly available. And also through our own safety reporting systems. And we also have a monitoring process in place, importantly, to assess the effectiveness of any of those manufacturer actions when they think they can mitigate risk and alter how the device is used or alter information around the device. And we'll act when these actions have not had the intended benefit or sufficiently reduced risk. One thing that was raised was, how do we tell patients? Well, we can tell patients through their healthcare professional, but also through our website and through other safety reporting mechanisms. But it is difficult, and we acknowledge that, to identify a specific patient who may be using a particular device or have a particular device implanted. And I think in the future, what we very much hope is that the new medical device regulation, and that's very much our ambition and our vision, is that with the unique device identifier, which is a unique number that's going to be specific to a device, that will greater facilitate that device traceability and allow us to understand when a patient has a particular device implanted, particular concern around those implantable devices. And as part of the legislation as well, we're hoping the proposal is to introduce requirements regarding implant information, which may be a virtual or a physical implant card or a leaflet, which will be provided at the time of the surgery and the time of seeking informed consent. So patients have more knowledge and awareness around what particular device they have implanted with them, or indeed that they're using. So I hope that provides sort of reassurance around the future traceability of specific devices. And more immediately and in parallel with these activities, and perhaps more specific to MESH, we talked, the question is around the MESH after the specialist centres, and there are a number of specialist centres for women experience adverse consequences from MESH, and those were established and became operational on the 1st of April 2021. But alongside that, and to support the process of informed consent, NICE have produced a series of decision aids, including an aid for women who are referred to these specialist centres to better inform them. And we do recommend, of course, that women discuss with their GP or indeed any individual with MESH or considering a MESH procedure, discuss with their GP or registered healthcare professional around that procedure, but also in the event of any concern post-surgery, whether referral to one of these centres is the appropriate route, and determine the right pathway of care for the individual.
Okay, well, thank you for a very comprehensive answer, Alison, as far as that's concerned. I think we do need to move on, so I think we'll go straight on to the next question, and maybe just ask the next few questions. If we can have slightly shorter answers, please, that would be great.
Yeah, so we're turning now to medical device consultation, and the questioner has said that they understand the assessment of the consultation will be completed by the end of March, with new regulations being published later this year. When the regulations are published, how long will industry have to comply with them before they're enforced? And the questioner adds that industry need to know this to be able to plan and complete any work that may be needed in advance of new regulations coming in.
Okay, Laura, do you want to pick this one up?
Yes, and I'll do it quite quickly because we have given written assurance around this. We recognise the need of industry to prepare clearly, and we've given that written commitment. Clearly, the priority for the new devices regulation is around safety and innovation and access as well, but ensuring a smooth transition and minimising unnecessary disruption is also going to be really important. So we've talked about a phased implementation. I can't confirm the exact timetables at the moment, but we are analysing the over 900 responses that we got with a view to publishing a summary of those at the end of the year. What I would say is that we will engage with industry and continue to engage with industry so they have an appropriate lead-in time for that, because that's the way we will make this successful.
And we probably also just need to point out there's also a parliamentary process that may be required around this. It'll certainly need to go to ministers, and it may need statutory instruments to be laid in Parliament as well. So this is not just in the gift of the agency. This is, again, a wide team effort in that regard. But certainly the message is clearly understood. Okay, Rachel, another question, please.
Yeah, thanks. And I wanted to pick up a question that's been put in the chat, actually, as a follow-up to Mark's comments on the innovation pathway. So the questioner is asking whether the MHRA was positioning the innovative licensing and access pathway, ILAP, to be the main point of access for the marketing authorisation of drugs. So as I say, follow up to Mark's earlier comments.
Okay, well, Mark, do you want to kick off? I might come to.
Yes, it's an excellent question. We're very, very excited at just how well ILAP's been taken up, but at the moment it is a developing tool. Whether it grows to become the main access route is something that's not been decided. We're still working through to see how we can get the best out of it. But that's something we'll come back to as we understand how ILAP develops. Yeah,
we also need to remember that that might be suitable for innovative products. We've got a whole wide range of hundreds and hundreds more established products and variations that probably ILAP is not the right approach.
Correct.
So I think it's probably going to be selecting the right pathway for the right product area.
Correct.
Okay. Great, thank you, Rachel. Have we got time for one last question?
And yes, one last question, which is how can patients get more involved in the work of the MHRA?
Okay, June, do you want to pick that one up?
Well, yes, it's a great question, because here at the agency we really are encouraging patients to get actively involved in our work, because we want to hear the patient voice, perspective, views on everything we do. And there's a number of ways, and I'll just highlight 3. We have a patient group forum, which then may lead to participation in workshops or deeper dives, focus groups, and that's a great way to get involved. Secondly, join a committee. We're always looking to get the lay perspective, and we benefit so much here at our board from the view from the patient perspective. And then if you're not able to take on those longer term commitments, look on the website for our consultations. We're currently consulting on clinical trials, and we're really pleased to hear the views of patients. So there's a number of ways to do this, but please, if you want to explore the patient group forum further, log on to engagement@mhra.gov.uk, and we'll be really pleased to welcome you.
That's great. Okay, well, thank you, June. Appreciate that very much. So, Rachel, I think that's the end of the pre-submitted questions. Again, let me just apologise again to members of the audience who might be looking after this after the event. Apologies, the technology didn't work for us, so we weren't able to take as many live questions as we would have liked. But certainly, I think we will continue to provide the opportunity, and we'll keep working on the technology issues. So, that being the case, I think that concludes the questions for today. It concludes the board meeting for today. I just want to thank everybody for their engagement, both who've been watching online, but also within the board as well. I'd like to thank the staff in the agency for their continued incredibly good work, and also the contribution to the papers they've produced, and also to colleagues in our Communications and Governance Office for the support in preparing today's meeting. I'd just like to conclude really by reminding everybody about the purpose of the MHRA is all about protecting and improving patient health. As we've said many times through today's meeting, that involves continuing to enable scientific innovation. It absolutely involves accelerating the safe access of new products to patients, and it's also about strengthening our long-term patient safety and surveillance systems. So with all of that in mind, I'd like to close the meeting. Thank you for your time, and have a good day.